So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Introduction to aPriori for Sourcing Tech Showcase. My name is Rick Hyde, and I'm a Director of Customer Success here at aPriori. I'm really pleased to be joined by Abe Chavez. Abe is a Principal Consultant in our Applied Services organization. So with that, Abe, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, everybody, for being in this demo. I just want to set the expectations correctly here. This demo is geared towards people that are new to aPriori, or are new to the sourcing use case. So maybe your company has been using it in engineering or manufacturing, but you're new in the sourcing use case. And because of that, we're going to start with a couple of level setting slides, and then we'll jump right into the demo. All right. So just a very quick background on how aPriori works. aPriori basically generates detailed manufacturing and cost estimates, cost data from a CAD model. It starts by extracting all the geometry that it can from that CAD model. How big is the part? How thick is it? Does it have any holes? How many holes? How big are they? Where are they? Where are they in relation to edges and each other and things like that? All that information is pulled out automatically. And once it knows that, then it goes to a virtual factory model and it starts running a manufacturing simulation. And from that, it's going to generate, the machines that it needs to use to make that part, right? What processes are required, what machines are required and sizes, what's the cycle time on each one of them, how much material is consumed, and so on. And once it has the manufacturing information, then it converts that to cost by going to a cost model that is basically regional based or your own factory based. So it knows, for example, that it costs more money in the US to run a 5-axis machine than it does in China or Mexico or India. And so it takes all those cycle times it calculated at each step of the process, and it multiplies by the appropriate labor and overhead rates for that virtual factory in that region, and comes up with cost, basically, right? So it now has basically very rich manufacturing information and cost information. And armed with that, we can help the sourcing professional in many ways, right? Because we're generating estimates, we can basically help you figure out which parts you might be overpaying, or it might be more expensive than what the a priori estimate is. And so that you can focus your time on just the parts that are worth pursuing, right? And that makes you obviously much more efficient. And then we help you be more effective by giving you varying levels of detail on the cost and manufacturing information at each step of the process. So with very rich data, you can have much more meaningful conversations with the suppliers about the cost of a part. And those tend to be much more fruitful. So let me just show you how that works. And this is where the demo begins. I'm going to start with basically a priori here. I need to switch applications here. So if you give me just 1 second, we will get to the right point. And can you let me know when you see the a priori screen?
Looks good, Abe.
All right. So basically what you have here is a casting. It's a machine casting. And a priori very quickly tells you what the summary of the cost of that part is. It's going to tell you, this much is material, and you can see most of the cost there is material, and this much is labor and overhead, and so on. And it even actually gives you an estimate for the tooling, for the cost of that mold. And if you're the person buying the mold, it gives you a lot of details about the cost of that mold, how he came up with the cost, right? What is the cost of the material to make the mold base, basically. The assembly, how much was the assembly of the mold, how much was the machining, all of the different components that it needed to add, and so on, so that the person buying the mold can have a meaningful conversation with the supplier of the mold about the cost, basically, right? But as far as the piece part cost goes, you can see here that a priori basically first determines how is it going to make that part, and it's assigned, for example, this part, the casting portion of it, to a 200-ton die casting machine. And then it's determined that it needs actually 2 types of machining. It needs some turning and it needs some machining. So it's going to assign the machining to a 2-axis lathe and then a 3-axis mill. And then it gives you a lot of details about that, right? So it gives you cycle time details, right? So it basically says cycle time, not just at the total, but at each step of the process, right? And it gives you cost details related to that part so that you know what the contribution of each step of the process is to the total cost of the part. So in this case, a priori saying that the total cost, the estimated cost of making this machine casting is about $107, and about 104 of that is the casting itself. That absorbs the material cost. So it's not just the casting, but the casting process, but the material as well. And then the machining is very small portion. This part is being made in Mexico. And it's only about, $3 to $350, right? So if you were buying this casting, and let's just say you're buying it for $150, now a priori would essentially identify this as an opportunity, right? Because the cost and the estimate are very far apart. And you can say to yourself, okay, if it costs about 107, I'm going to give the supplier some margin, obviously. So maybe I should be paying 120 tops, right? So you take this estimate and you go have a discussion with the supplier. And the discussion doesn't need to be confrontational. It's just a matter of, hey, I created this estimate for this part. It's not fitting well with the price that we're paying. And we just need to understand, where is the difference? Why is there a difference? And so can you help me understand my estimate versus your quote? And let's see where the difference comes in. And you can start by just saying, we estimate that the casting cost is just the casting, no machining, is about $104, $105. The supplier might say, yeah, it's closer to 110, but that's close enough. And then you can say, okay, we estimated that the machining should have only been about, $350 or so. And supplier can say, well, no, that's very different than what my cost is. You're almost off by a factor of 10 there. And you can say, all right, but maybe I miscalculated the cycle time. Maybe there is something that I missed, a feature that I missed. And the supplier might say, no, I don't even know what the cycle time is because I don't machine that part. You see, 90% of the castings I make, all I do is basically machine some faces and make some holes, but I don't have any turning mills. So this part required turning, so I sent it out to a sub-supplier. So then I have to create the parts, right? Package them, create them, ship them, have a supplier do the machining, then package them, ship them again. And I'm charging you for all that cost and a premium because I'm taking a risk. If my supplier, for example, makes that hole too big, I lost the casting. I have to pour the casting all over again, right? So I'm charging you a premium on that. And so my cost ends up being more like, or the cost that I pass on to you turns out to be more like $30 for that. And so now you understand where the cost is. Now you understand why there is a difference and you have options. You could just let that supplier just make the casting and then you find somebody else to do the machining so you don't have to pay all the premiums. You could bring it in-house and machine it yourself, or you could negotiate the premiums down. If that part is being made for a long time and the process is stable, his risk is really not that much anymore, right? So you could opt to negotiate the premiums that he's paying, right? So, but the point is that by understanding what the breakdown is and details of the cost, you can get into that level of conversation with the supplier and then figure out what to do about the difference. Right? So now you might be saying, okay, Abe, you told me that you were going to show me how to use aPriori to better negotiate with my supplier, right? But also you're going to show me how to use aPriori to analyze a whole bunch of parts and then bubble up which ones I really should be looking at. And what we have for that is I actually have to oops, change screens here. Again. What we have is a reporting system that sits on top of aPriori and allows you to slice and dice the information in the database in many different ways. And there's many ways to help you figure out what you might be overpaying for, but I'm just going to show you the main report that we recommend that customers use. Oops, flags me out. That customers use to identify where the opportunities might be, and what we call that a design outlier report, obviously. And what we're going to do here is we're going to look at a whole bunch of parts. There's a whole bunch of stampings, and see what aPriori gives us here, right? So you can have aPriori look at a collection of, oops, wrong one. I apologize for that. Cost outlier. Let's look at the stampings. So we're looking at a collection of parts here, basically. There are stampings. And what aPriori is doing is it's showing you data in two different ways at the same time for a reason. On the top chart here, what you see is what you're currently paying for the part versus times the amount of parts that you buy in a year. So that's essentially your spend. And the blue bar here is what aPriori thinks you could be paying for the part times the number of parts you buy in a year. And so the difference becomes your potential savings. And then the bottom is just a straight up comparison, what you're paying for the part versus what aPriori thinks you could be paying for the part. And what we plot here is the percent difference. And the reason you want to look at both of these together is because you want to figure out where you're going to spend your time, what's worth your time. And so what you want is parts that have a high potential saving and a good amount of difference between the cost and the estimate, right? Because you could have a part, for example, here, that there is a decent amount of difference, is more than 30% difference between the estimate and your cost, but there is very little savings to be had. So maybe that's not worth your time pursuing, right? Or you could have a part where you have significant amount of savings, almost $250,000 that are identified as potential. But the difference between what aPriori thinks you could be paying for the part and your actual cost, in this case, it's not little, but it's not a lot either. So there is less room to actually create a gain there, right? So that might be second tier. Maybe you go back on a second pass and do that, but it's not your first priority. So we try to basically give you a way to very quickly identify which ones you should go pursue and how do you prioritize that. So now let me open it up to any questions here.
So I don't see any questions within the chat window. I guess I'll just remind folks again, if you have any questions, please go to the conference website for this session and post them right within the discussion thread.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, if there are any questions that come to mind, the discussion thread will remain open. So feel free to go in there later in the day and add any questions that you have. And Abe and I will be actively monitoring that and replying to any questions right within the thread. But thank everybody so much for their attendance, and hopefully you enjoy your next session.